Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone. This is a book summary and analysis of Our Man in Damascus, the story of Eli Cohen. This is a book biography by Elie Ben-Hanan. It also is an attempt to draw parallels between the story of Eli Cohen and the curious case of Jeffrey Epstein, along with modern-day Israeli intelligence operations. So the story begins with Eli Cohen at work. It all began casually on a spring morning in 1960 when Cohen was working as an accountant in the supply department of Central Distributors. That morning, someone knocked on the door of his office and asked if he could come in. "Please do, have a seat," Elie said, motioning to a chair beside his desk. The man nodded agreeably. Then he put out his hand. "My name is Zalman. The second name is not important." He smiled at Ellie's look of amazement. "I don't know if I can speak here," he whispered, leaning forward. "I work for the Ministry of Defense. I'm an intelligence officer." "Intelligence officer?" The man nodded. "It's a rather unusual job which involves a lot of traveling. I'd say it's rather interesting." "What do you want from me?" Elie asked. "I've been asked to offer you a position in our services," the man said placidly. "What kind of position?" "Interesting work, which includes trips to Europe. Most likely you'll get to visit Arab countries as well." Big takeaway, they approached him, not the other way around. To get out of the office, the two men go on a walk in which Zalman says to Cohen, "To be able to blend in with a crowd is one of the chief characteristics of a good spy," he said as they were walking. They continue talking, and he mentions something about how the spies are going to speak to one another so they don't get caught. And Cohen says, "If I understand you correctly, by coding a message like this, I can create meaningless sentences and then give them meaning by using a fixed numerical code," he said. So Cohen eventually comes on board. His first big event that he's involved in, today we know as the Lavon Affair. It happened at the end of the summer of 1954. Information arriving from London caused Israeli leaders a considerable amount of worry. It seemed that the elderly Churchill, under Egyptian pressure and pressured by frequent acts of terrorism, had decided to withdraw the British forces from their bases in the Suez Canal area. For the ruling junta in Egypt, this was a considerable accomplishment. But as far as Israel was concerned, the British presence in the canal area was vital. It was clear to the Israeli government that as long as the British remained there, they occupied the attention of the Arab masses and served as the target for all their undirected hatred and energy. The more official reason was that the British presence in such a potentially inflammable area would likely cool down the Egypt's hawks, especially those officers thinking out loud about a second round in the war with Israel. The best solution seemed to be a series of sabotage attempts and open provocations to be carried out by hired terrorists secretly trained in sabotage and espionage since 1951 by Israeli agents. So in order to get the West to fight on behalf of Israel against its Arab enemies, they're going to stage false flag terrorist attacks. Then, in the months of May and June 1954, Israel decided to activate the group decisively. Instructions were received at the headquarters calling for sabotage in public buildings, cinemas, post offices, and railroad stations. The main target was to be British institutions such as libraries, cultural centers, houses owned by British citizens, and the British legation in Egypt. The aim? To bring Britain to the conclusion that it was still too early to pull out of Egypt and that all the guarantees offered by Egyptian government in exchange for the evacuation of the bases were ineffective in the light of continuing wave of terrorism. In the middle of July, the fateful message arrived and Operation Egypt began. This is known as the Lavon Affair. It was a failed Israeli covert operation codenamed Operation Sus-Asuna, conducted in Egypt in the summer of 1954 as part of a false flag operation. A group of Egyptian Jews were recruited by Israeli military intelligence to plant bombs inside Egyptian, American, and British-owned civilian targets, cinemas, libraries, and American educational centers. Attacks were to be blamed on the Muslim Brotherhood. Also, in these slides, you'll see clips of the Carl Cameron Fox News 4-part investigation into the American-Israeli spy ring, very closely related to the type of thing going on with Eli Cohen. This was the head of the conspiracy in the upper left-hand portion, Phineas Lavon. The terrorists were eventually caught, and here's how the book describes that. 20 hours later, on July 16th, following the strongly worded American protests, a second wave was begun. The Cairo group destroyed several public buildings, while the Alexandria group agreed to blow up 2 cinemas, the Rivoli and the Rio. The fact that Egyptian intelligence was guarding all public buildings in these cities did not serve as a deterring factor. That day, however, the group's daring and rashness worked against them. Here are the terrorists involved in this event here. After they got caught by Egyptian officials, they were later interrogated. The torture machine in Cairo prison began working under relentless cross-examination. Each one of the suspects collapsed. Max Bennett broke down completely. He slashed his veins on a nail in the cell door and bled to death. 3 months after the arrest, the first item on the capture of the Israeli spy network appeared in the Egyptian press. The trial itself was set for December 17th. So here is more or less how the interrogations went according to this biographer. This is the Egyptian official questioning the Israeli agents. He questioned the lad thoroughly, then asked, "Tell me, why have your sabotage attempts been directed against Western embassies and institutions? As Egyptian patriots," the intelligence assets said, "we want to get the foreign agents out of our country," Nathanson said. "They won't go unless we give them a shove." So they're creating this idea that we, the Israeli terrorists, are actually Egyptians, and we want the West out of here. So we're actually going to murder, people who are part of this institution, when in reality, we know the true story. The officer chuckled. "Who told you that shoves like that will get the British out of Egypt?" "Well," he replied after a short hesitation, "it worked in Palestine. There they gave the British so much trouble that they had to leave," the officer scoffed. "If I'm supposed to believe you're really an Egyptian patriot, how do you explain the fact that you and your friends have blown up cinemas and post offices, which are Egyptian property?" Nathanson shrugged. "Those weren't serious explosions." "Serious or not," the officer retorted, "they were explosions. True, but we had to practice on something," said the Israeli asset. We have another very similar item to this that was done before the Lavon Affair by Israeli intelligence, known as the bombing of the King David Hotel. This was a terrorist attack carried out July 22nd, 1946, by the militant right-wing Zionist underground organization, the Irgun, on the British administrative headquarters for Palestine, which was housed in the southern wing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem during the Jewish insurgency in Mandatory Palestine. 91 people of various nationalities were killed and 46 were injured. Now, it just so happens the King David Hotel is where Cohen was taken right when he got to Jerusalem. We also have the USS Liberty incident. Was an attack on a United States Navy technical research ship by Israeli Air Force jet fighter aircraft and Israeli Navy motor torpedo boats on June 8, 1967, during the Six-Day War. This was done so Israel could blame an attack on the Arabs, so the U.S. will fight for Israel against its Arab enemies in the Middle East. So here, back to the book, is an exchange between Eli Cohen and his handler. "What do I have to do?" Cohen says. "You'll have to get used to the fact that you're a Muslim," which of course he isn't really. "That in itself ought to keep you busy. You'll have to think the way a good Muslim thinks and act accordingly. Everything else will come in due course." "You think I can pass as a Muslim?" Elie asked. Yitzhak gave him a probing look, appraising his tall and oriental features. I don't think there's the slightest doubt you'll pass for a Muslim in every respect, even if they don't know the Quran or that Muhammad was the prophet of Allah. After a moment of silence, he added, incidentally, when it comes to questions of religion, remember the following rule. If they ask you questions you're not sure of, tell them you're not an Orthodox Muslim and you have only vague memories of your school days. So Cohen is sent back on a mission in which his handler says, so listen carefully. When you leave here, we'll fix you up with a Syrian or Iraqi identity card. When the time comes, the appropriate person will give it to you. Why Iraq? Elie asked. I don't know much about Iraq. Why don't I go on a mission in Egypt? There I know my way around better. At the time, Syria, Egypt, Iraq, these are all the most powerful Arab states that are Israel's enemies. Today, we still have the Mossad doing this. The Guardian, Mossad spies jailed over New Zealand passport fraud. According to Palestine Chronicle Post, Mossad is known to use the identities of Israelis with dual citizenship. In 1997, 2 Mossad agents traveled with Canadian passports of dual citizenship Israelis to Amman in a botched attempt on the life of Hamas leader Khalid Misal. According to former Mossad agent Viktor Ostrovsky, a Canadian citizen, the Mossad formally asked permission to use the passports of Israelis with dual nationality, but I believe at some point they stopped asking. Eli Cohen's undercover name is Kamal. He'll be referenced as Kamal multiple times throughout this. He then goes to Argentina so he could develop a fabricated origin story before going to Syria, infiltrating the government there. Ellie's handler says, try to live quietly. I'll cover all expenses. Money doesn't have to worry you. Anyways, memorize this address and then destroy it. So they tell him they're going to give him a lot of money, so much that he doesn't have to worry, doesn't have to economize at all, and they're destroying evidence along the way so as to cover their tracks. He handed Elie a visiting card. Remember, this is only in case of emergency. For the next 2 months, during which Elie became proficient in Spanish, they seldom met. Then, one bright morning, Avram said, the time has come. I've got everything set up for your new role. Here's a Syrian passport in the name of Kamal Amin Tabat. Tomorrow, you'll move into the Syrian quarter. The book goes on. Again, I am giving a summary here. Elie got the hint and wasn't unduly surprised. In less than 3 months, he had become the most sought-after bachelor in the Syrian community of Buenos Aires, which tried to avoid intermarriages. So he was able to develop his personality in such a way that when he moved to Argentina to become popular with the Syrian community there, within 3 months, he was hanging out with the very valuable, well-known, well-connected people. Book continues. He knew that to win friends and influence people, he had to listen patiently to what they had to say, even when it was boring as hell. Israel, Elie interrupted. You mean to say you sell meat to Zionists and not to the fatherland? This is his way of virtue signaling or tribal signaling to the Syrians in Argentina. Sir, it goes on. Sir, permit me to introduce Kamal Amin Tabat. El Zamuni said, one of our most successful businessmen and a Syrian citizen who is proud of his country. He's being sold as a Syrian nationalist with a lot of money and a lot of connections, really wanting to help Syrian nationalist organizations establish a coup in Syria to weaken the Syrian government so Israel has less of a competitor in the region. Abdul Latif rose and shook hands with him. My name is Abdul Latif Hashan, editor of the Arab World, making connections in media. I've heard a lot about you, Kamal. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Cohen says. I've read your paper. I find it extremely interesting, though politically it's rather on the moderate side, continuing to virtue signal to the Syrians. Hey, I'm really one of you guys. Cohen then asked this guy that they're talking about him becoming a member of the Ba'ath Party in Syria. And he says, the party's constitution states that a member is accepted after a minimum of 2 years candidacy in which he has proved his sincerity and persistence. But since you are clearly an ardent patriot, you can take advantage of my friendship and save 2 years. So he was expedited membership into the Syrian Ba'ath Party. Cohen goes back to meet with his handlers, and in the conversation, his handler says, your transmitter is with Zellinger in Munich. He has multiple connections all across Europe, South America, and the Arab world. He'll give it to you along with the papers in your new name, fabricating identities again. When you get to Damascus, you'll be contacted by one of the employees of the Syrian Broadcasting Service, again, infiltration into media, an immigrant like yourself, but don't put too much trust in him and don't try to locate him. It's his job to make contact with you. Again, we can see how the strings are pulled by the intelligence agencies, making him into an asset as opposed to him having to seek out people. It's much less risky this way. It's important to know that even just this last year, according to Politico as well as CBS, and certainly it hasn't been refuted by many organizations, telling us there's a very good chance this is true. Israel accused of planting mystery spy devices near the White House. The likely Israeli spying efforts were uncovered during the Trump presidency, several former top U.S. officials said. And the goal here, of course, is to have leverage on the president and politicians so Israel can basically tell them what to do and fight their wars on Israel's behalf, regardless of whether it's true or that there's a moral justification or there isn't for going into the war. Again, we have New York Times. Britain expels Israeli diplomat over fake passports. Elie's handler then goes over his the contents of what he's taking on his trip. This case I have with me contains everything you'll need. You might say it's a very up-to-date and diversified espionage kit. You have paper containing the code in invisible ink, a transmitter radio with a miniature transmitter, an electric shaver with a cord that can serve as an antenna, dynamite fingers concealed in a package of Yardley soap, and yes, cyanide pills for suicide. He waited to see Elie's reaction. I know, Elie said. Suicide only when everything else fails. This is how in-depth these intelligence operations go. Here is Cohen describing himself to other people in Syria. Let's not exaggerate. I've had a bit of a career, but nothing special, you see. In Damascus, I'm known as a very successful merchant. People are jealous of me, the government also, because they don't like independent forces much. Again, eerily similar to the Jeffrey Epstein background story of how he was able to acquire so much wealth and so many properties. Something I think the Netflix documentary Filthy Rich did an excellent job in portraying. Someone gets all this wealth and all this power out of nowhere. Usually they'd have a lot of connections, so it certainly raises suspicion. The book then goes on to Cohen's first few days in Syria. He spent his first days in Damascus at the Samara Hotel until, through Sheikh Majid, he found an elegant villa in the Abdu Rahmana quarter, which looked out on the Syrian army headquarters and faced the entrance to a luxurious dwelling where the Syrian government put up its official guests. So he was spending time around the top officials in the Syrian government without being spotted. The same quarter also boasted the residence of the heads of the regime, the rich men of Damascus, and the diplomatic representatives of the various foreign legations. Standing at the window and looking out on the wonderful scenery, Elie knew that no house anywhere else was worth the high rent of this villa. When the landlord demanded a year's rent in advance, Elie didn't think twice. Again, having access to a lot of money, he thrust into his hand in cash 1,300 Syrian pounds. The well-known Arab garuladi, he knew would quickly spread the news about the affluent new resident, and people would soon be knocking on his door. So just simply by being rich and making large purchases, he was able to get his name out there. Continuing on Cohen's time in Syria, Kamal Amin Tabet, the millionaire and successful businessman, was the right man in the right place. There was no doubt, and Cohen was the first to admit, that the many letters of recommendation had opened the doors of high society to him. His checkbook aroused respect among the Damascus merchants and bankers, the very circles who had inspired and financed the revolution of September 29th, 1961, referencing a revolution in Syria. With ample funds at his disposal, Elie decided to play to the hilt the role of an avowed Ba'athist and rich and generous Syrian. At the same time, in the first phase, he tried not to commit himself entirely to the new regime. Tightrope walking was a most important art in Syria at the time. A few gestures of goodwill were enough to make all eyes focus on him, especially the eyes of several rich merchants anxious to marry off their innocent daughters. Elie declined all of the offers of marriage that poured in and succeeded in remaining the most sought-after bachelor in Damascus. One evening, a tall, attractive man with silver hair and a round face knocked on his door and introduced himself as the Director of Foreign Broadcasting for Radio Damascus. This man's name was Salman. "It may sound strange," Salman said, "but when I am asked to do something in exchange for something, I'm always ready to comply with the request." This is the philosophy of leverage, more or less. As Robert Cialdini calls it, the idea of reciprocity, that when you just initiate a gift or even ask for a favor, you are engaging in a give-and-take negotiation where you're building trust in a relationship. This is why Epstein, right when he gets his house in Palm Beach, automatically gives a very large, I want to say it was at least $100,000, to the Palm Beach Police Department. This is something that benefited him. They were able to tip him off before his house was raided and his computer hard drives were taken out. Of course, we know about Epstein's other foundations that he was giving money to. So he makes a deal with this guy, and the next day Elie was invited to honor with his presence at a party thrown by Salim Saif. Among with guests, Salim whispered, as if revealing a secret, "Will be all the who's who of our top brass." So if you look at this article right here, who was Jeffrey Epstein calling? A close study of his circle, social, professional, transactional, reveals a damning portrait of the elite in New York. This is according to the Intelligencer. And then you see in his book, John Kerry, the Trumps, Kevin Spacey, Peter Soros, Maria Shriver, Rothschild, Jeffrey Sachs, Chris Tucker, Chrissy Tegan, Alan Dershowitz, Ehud Barak, Prime Minister of Israel. I mentioned John Kerry. You have more Rothschild names. You have princes. You have every imaginable number for Les Wexner that you can imagine. He has access to David Blaine, Richard Branson, Tony Blair, Mike Bloomberg, David Koch, Rupert Murdoch, Ted Kennedy, Bruce King, Naomi Campbell, Mick Jagger. So he's very diverse. It's not just he was friends with the bankers or just the politicians or people who are actors or just people who were producers. He had a very, very large web of networks. And Henry Kissinger, of course, as well as David Rockefeller. Chapter 8, the title is Entertaining the Syrian Top Brass. Here is a picture of Prince Andrew trying to hide as he says goodbye to a woman leaving Epstein's Manhattan residence. Here's a conversation Cohen had with a gentleman at a party. "I don't believe so. I'm an immigrant from Argentina," continuously selling that fake story. "Here only a few months," Cohen said. "Nevertheless, you've managed to make quite a reputation as a philanthropist and successful merchant, and the entire elite is talking about the patriot Amin Tabet," the officer said, with unconcealed admiration. "How do you explain your success?" So again, his wealth and money is what attracted people to him in the first place, which gave him the initial leverage he needed. Here is Cohen starting in, I believe it is the first party that he hosts. The day after tomorrow, I'm having a little party at my place with lots of girls and drinks. Would you honor me with your presence, Colonel? The Colonel was obviously flattered. I'll try to be there, he said. And I hope there'll be lots of action. By the end of the party that evening, Elie had precise information on the Ba'ath's plans for a military takeover. He returned home, waited for the morning transmission hour, and passed the information on to Tel Aviv. The information about the parties continues. Below you'll see a number of Epstein's properties. On the evening of the party, a number of agreeable girls were recruited from the Syrian Defense Ministry to serve as hostesses to the officers and top leadership, all under the guise of a birthday party. So what he would essentially do is one part hire the girls to get specific information from these generals from the Syrian Defense Ministry, in exchange, in acting curious with the colonels. Hey, I'm very curious. This is the only way that I'll sleep with you, is if you tell me this. The morons fall for it, I guess, or they don't care. And then the girls end up telling Cohen. Or another way that could happen is Cohen just says, hey, these girls were underage. Hey, she says you forced yourself on her. We're going to let this leak out unless you tell me A, B, and C. That would blow his cover, so it's much less likely that that is the case. But the first one certainly is true, as they get into later. The book goes on. In any case, I certainly enjoy being here, especially after all the long days of boredom there on the Palestinian border in those bunkers and tunnels we built to defend against an Israeli air attack. So here we are on the Syrian border. Cohen actually got access to because as a favor for one of the generals who he hired hookers for. Salim straightened up. Did you know that the border is full of subterranean passageways inhabited by hundreds of Syrian soldiers? Elie raised his eyebrows. Really? You see, it's a kind of underground magnet line. It allows you to look out on the Israeli border and see the whole countryside. Remind me sometime, Kamal, and I'll take you on a tour of the place. I'm sorry, they're not at the place yet. They discuss going to the Syria border. Are you authorized to do that? Elie asked suspiciously. Why not? I'm the regional commander there, Salim said proudly. But I'm only a loyal citizen, Elie explained. Don't worry, my friend. You're close to the regime. You are one of us. Little more background as to the reality of this sort of honey trap, as it's called. The Washington Post reported in 1987 that most Westerners who have spent any length of time in Moscow have their favorite tale of an attempted seduction by a KGB swallow or raven. Swallow and Raven are code names for hired hookers by intelligence agencies. East German spies for East Germany were called Romeos, created by Markus Wolf, the former head of East Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service, the Stasi. Around 40 women were prosecuted for espionage in the Federal Republic of Germany. This is a well-known popular tactic. Here is an interaction at Cohen's house with Cohen, a general, and the girl, one of the prostitutes. Good evening, Colonel, she said. Good evening, beautiful. He moved over to make room for her. Sit down beside me. I don't want to be alone this evening. She sat down. Kamal asked me to make you feel at home, she murmured. But not what you're expecting. I don't understand, he said. I'm a good friend of Kamal's and I trust him. He asked me to come to his birthday party. He told me there'd be many important people, army officers and intellectuals. She gave him a long look. That's why I agreed to come. Salomon chuckled out loud. Okay, innocents, he laughed, but hospitality demands at least a little kiss. So, this is, again, how we arise at the honey trap and how you can bring the girls in with money, attention, and access to famous people. You bring them in by giving them access to the girls. It's an amazing setup that he has here. There is actually a code name for such honey traps, generally referred to as sexpionage, is the involvement of sexual activity or the possibility of sexual activity, intimacy, romance, or seduction to conduct espionage. Sex or the possibility of sex can function as a distraction, incentive, cover story, or unintended part of any intelligence operation. Sexpionage is a historically documented phenomenon, and even the CIA has previously added Nigel West's work, Historical Dictionary of Sexpionage, to its proposed intelligence officer's bookshelf. A commonly known type of sexpionage is a honey trap operation, which is designed to compromise an opponent sexually to elicit information from that person. In the KGB, a man who is a seducer in a honey trap operation is known as a raven. A female seductress is known as a swallow. The raven effectively functions as an undercover pimp, while the swallow functions as an undercover prostitute. A swallow nest was the name given for the double apartments in which the target would be seduced in one room, while next door KGB technicians filmed or taped the entire affair. Here is an exchange between Cohen and the colonel. Tell her she fascinates you. Tell her about your army adventures, your many connections, if you have any. Those girls love to hear secrets from a military man. It gives them a feeling of self-importance. The colonel gives the secrets to the girls give the secrets to Cohen. When they're convinced that you trust them, they'll give in just like that. Salim opened his eyes wide. And as the wiki page said, if you go to CIA.gov and look at the list of books they recommend, one of them actually involves sexpionage, the exploitation of sex by Soviet intelligence. U.S. intelligence services, for example, are concerned when their own personnel could be subject to sexual blackmail. This applied to homosexual relationships until the mid-90s, and also applied to homosexual relationships with most foreign nationals. One former CIA officer said that while sexual entrapment wasn't generally a good tool to recruit a foreign official, it was sometimes employed successfully to solve short-term problems. Seduction is a classic technique. Swallow was the KGB tradecraft term for women, and raven the term for men trained to seduce intelligence targets. And we have a long history of intelligence agencies using blatant deception, even if it's actually not real. We have Jeff Stein reporting CIA's unit's wacky idea depicts Saddam as gay. One was to create a video purporting to show the Iraqi dictator having sex with a teenage boy, according to two former CIA officials familiar with the project. The idea was to then flood Iraq with the videos. Here is Mike Pompeo, the former director of the CIA, saying, "We lied, we cheated, we stole." Saying, I was the director of the CIA. This is what happens. This is him speaking about this sort of open secret to a group of cadets, and they, of course, laugh and applaud. So here is Cohen getting invited to the Syrian base, probably the biggest part of his entire operation. The next day, an army messenger knocked on Kamal's door with a telegram from Maziz Zahar Adin, commander of the army camp at El Hama on the Israeli border. On the recommendation of Salim Khatum, the cable read, "And for the sake of our friendship, allow me to invite you on a courtesy tour of our base." All this was possible because of that woman he got Salim to sleep with. The Army courier produced an application form and transit permits to be signed. Later the same day, a military commander car pulled up and took Elie to the Syrian-Israeli border. This is an interesting exchange Cohen has with the commander at the border when talking about, why don't we just take out the Zionist state? If so, with all the armaments we have and with this excellent position, why can't we drive them into the sea? If it were up to only us, I assure you that the Israelis would have been gone long ago. The trouble is that the Israelis have world sympathy, and the big wheels are protecting this little bastard nation. But what about the Israeli army? Elie asked carefully. Maziz Zahar Adin made a face. Yes, they have an army that any Arab country would be proud of, but, as you will understand, that isn't what's stopping us. Then what is? Look, Kamal. We have better armaments than they have. We have several times more men. We have topographic superiority. But all that isn't enough in modern warfare. What we're lacking is the support of public opinion and the power to fight the entire West, which is behind Israel. That's how important getting leverage over Western nations is for Israel. It's literally, does Israel exist or does it not exist? Depends on whether or not the U.S. and Britain are backing it. Then why do the authorities proclaim war against the Jews morning and night? It's probably good for politics, but just between us, I may tell you that it's very bad for the army. The defense plans, the concentrated armaments, the fortifications, the attack plans, the facts and figures about the strength of the force were all revealed to Eli Cohen through the courtesy of his good friends, the local commanders. In exchange, Elie gave them presents and entertained them in his home at all hours. So again, we have Jeffrey Epstein having access to this place, Leslie Wexner's house in Ohio. Epstein had a house, or a mansion rather, in Palm Beach, Florida. His Manhattan mansion. He had a mansion in New Mexico. He had a place in Paris. He had, of course, the famous place in the Virgin Islands. Here again is a sexpionage attempt to the guy who was showing him around the border. You've given me a feeling that you trust me, Elie said. I would like to return the compliment. I want you to know that my house is open to you anytime you wish to come. And that's why we see Prince Andrew at Epstein's house so many times, when Andrew could obviously get his own hotel anywhere he wants in New York, but he doesn't, and we now know the reason why. Maziz Zahar Adin smiled pleasantly. And if you want to be entertained in suitable company, Elie added, don't hesitate. Just let me know a day ahead of time and everything will be fine. You will never lack wine, women, and diversion in the home of Kamil Amin Tibet. Again, Kamil Tibet is Eli Cohen. Kamil is his spy name, his undercover name. Cohen is then back having a discussion with his handler. And I actually forget where this takes place. But this is an exchange between Cohen and his Israeli intelligence handler. While you were away, we received a number of pieces of equipment that are likely to help you in your work here, Yitzhak said. A few offbeat cameras for copying documents. One of them is the size of a piece of chocolate. And the microfilm can easily be hidden in chess pieces or dice. Again, we have Eric Weinstein saying he walks into Jeffrey Epstein's house, boom, sees a hidden camera in a piece of art. Maria Farmer saying there were hidden cameras in his Manhattan residence. Whistleblowers like Virginia Roberts saying there were hidden cameras. And he actually had leverage, and politicians and, well-connected businessmen on camera committing these acts. Yes, detailed situation reports. At this moment, we need a full estimate of the strength of the Ba'ath party in Syria that might overthrow the current regime. It seems that party would be the ruin of Israel. Here we have a list of people convicted of spying for Israel. Long list once you get into it. Chapter 9 is titled, Elie's Friend Becomes President of Syria. The best friends of Kamil Amin Tibet became ministers and government leaders. El Hafez himself, after a small palace revolt, was named president of the state. From then on, Kamil's path was strewn with roses. In honor of the revolution, a magnificent party was thrown for all the supporters of the new regime. And who was to be the man behind it all? None other than Kamil Amin Tibet, Eli Cohen. Of course, Jeffrey Epstein had Bill Clinton on his plane a recorded 26 times without Secret Service. Here he is on a plane going to Africa with Chris Tucker. Bottom right, we have Bill Clinton and Ghislaine Maxwell. Again, they have so much power that they have no problem posing for these pictures, risking so much because the masses just are under such mind control. They have no understanding of the historical use of these things. So it just sounds, oh, that sounds so unrealistic. I'm going to call it a conspiracy theory, as the Mockingbird media has told me to. And now I've just dismissed it. I don't need logic or anything else. I've called it a name. We can move on. And then you get pictures like this. Didn't Bill Clinton see someone taking a picture of him, or did he just not care? They're just so open with this girl giving him a massage in the middle of the airport. And this is a well-known Jeffrey Epstein associate. We can actually see her with Epstein in the bottom right. And we have another picture of Clinton and this girl together. These pictures were released on the night of the Democratic convention. No shame, of course, he spoke. Again, as I mentioned, on the right-hand side, this is Maria Farmer, one of the first whistleblowers with her sister Annie, going back to 1996, first reporting an event that, a sexual assault that happened to her by Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein in I believe it was either in the New Mexico residence that was his, or the Ohio residence that was Leslie Wexner's. According to the Daily Mail, Jeffrey Epstein hid cameras in properties to blackmail his guests. Back to our man in Damascus. The information was transmitted to Israel by every possible means and was utilized to the full. Later on, when he renewed the parties at his home, he chose suitable girls and, without arousing their suspicions, managed to persuade them to collect any information of value. At the height of his wildest parties, he didn't hesitate to take a series of pictures that would serve as first-rate extortion material. So in order to not blow his cover, he could give the pictures to someone else. Someone else could say, here's our pictures, tell us A, B, and C. All right, and then destroy the pictures in front of the person. A high-ranking French personage who attended one of these parties later said that the place, the people, and the scene resembled an Oriental version of the Ballad of Roses, or an orgy a la Christine Keeler. This is a book, Sexpionage, The Exploitation of Sex by Soviet Intelligence, by David Lewis. Again, this is widely practiced. Our man in Damascus continues. Despite all his attempts at blackmail for security purposes, Cohen did nothing to soil his name. People who tried to take advantage of their connections with Elie in order to do business with the government were rejected by him with disgust. As a revolutionary man loyal to the Ba'ath, he would burst out, "How do you expect to buy my heart with hush money?" Bakish went out with the advent of the Ba'ath. His patriotic pronouncements and unqualified loyalty to the regime raised Elie to hitherto unknown heights in the militaristic state. His civil standing reached a record high, and the proof of it came during the visit to Syria of General Ali Ammar, chief of the United Arab Command. Eli Cohen was the only civilian who joined the tour of colonels and generals alongside the Israel-Syria border. He followed the explanations of the area given by the commander and remembered all he could remember. So eventually, the Syrian officials got wise to what was going on, considering Israel was able to think 2 steps ahead of them constantly. They broke into Cohen's apartment, saw his transmitter, saw that he had this message coming in. Tel Aviv, it read, wants additional information on, etc. Who would have thought this tiny set could reach Tel Aviv? Look what I found inside the soap, the man said. Explosives and 3 packages of poison. So he is then arrested and taken to trial. No one wanted to believe that Kamel, the darling of the administration and candidate for a minister's post in the Ba'ath government, the millionaire envied by all and noted philanthropist, was a spy, and for the hated Zionist state at that. Now remember, Hafez is his former friend who was the president of Syria. "It's incredible," Hafez mumbled. "It's incredible. Kamel isn't even a Muslim. I asked him a few religious questions. I was amazed to learn that Kamal isn't a Muslim at all." Which just goes to show you, when people don't want to believe something, they won't interrogate anyone when they just don't have any reason to either suspect it, or they're reaping so many benefits from being friends with a rich guy who has hookers and alcohol all the time that you just have every incentive to look the other way. Now, you might be saying, well, so what? He's eventually hanged in the middle of Damascus. You might say, well, this is just one author giving his biography. Maybe he has poor sources. Well, we have a number of sources claiming that Eli Cohen had orgies at his mansion in Syria after inviting the heads of Syrian government so he could either blackmail them or simply get information by them giving it to the prostitutes. Here is the Jewish Virtual Library. He continued with his social life, Cohen, spending a lot of time in cafes listening to political gossip. He also held parties at his home, which turned into orgies for high-placed Syrian ministers, businessmen, and others who used Ellie's apartment for assignations with various women, including defense military secretaries, airline hostesses, and Syrian singing stars. Again, go back to Jeffrey Epstein's contact list, absolute in-depth network of individuals to which he could attract virtually anyone to any of his mansions. Here is a 2018 New York Times report on Eli Cohen. Israel's secret operation to recover the watch of a legendary spy. This is how big the guy is. They want his watch so bad they're willing to make a big deal about it. Mr. Cohen, an Egyptian Jew, immigrated to Israel in 1957 and joined the Israeli military intelligence in 1960. He was assigned to be an undercover agent posing as a wealthy Syrian business executive recently returned from Argentina. He befriended top Syrian officials whom he lured to his apartment with lavish parties where he dispensed free-flowing liquor and prostitutes. Over the years, he was able to provide the Mossad with extensive information on the Syrian order of battle, the location of fortifications, Syria's relations with the Soviet Union, parliamentary gossip over power struggles within leadership. Under pressure from his handlers in Israel, and overconfident in his own cover story, he started broadcasting messages in Morse code on a near daily basis using a telegraphic device he kept hidden in his home. But his transmitter caused interference with the radio used by the Syrian Army Chief of Staff Command, which was across the street from his apartment, eventually leading to his capture. He was arrested, interrogated, brutally tortured, tried, and sentenced to death. Israel did everything in its power to stop his execution, asking foreign diplomats to intervene and offering the Syrians a huge ransom to no avail. So we have New York Times Jewish Virtual Library. Here is a book titled Mossad, The Greatest Missions of the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, Mossad, by Michael Bar Zohar and Nassim Mashal. Panic spread throughout Damascus. Was Cohen a lone wolf or the head of a spy ring? One after the other, 69 people were arrested, 27 of them women. Among the suspects were Majid Shahik El Arad, George Salim Shahif, Lieutenant Zahar al-Din, senior officials of the Ministry of Propaganda, prostitutes, and other women whose identities were not revealed. 400 people who had been in contact with Tibet. Tibet was Cohen's code name. The television cameras showed Cohen's co-defendants, El Ard, Al-Din, Sif, a few prostitutes, So again, we have multiple sources that he actually used his home for orgies, just as many are suspecting, including myself, with the Jeffrey Epstein case. Now, as far as, well, isn't this just so unrealistic? Certainly, I would have heard of this by now if this were anything real. Well, you have to realize that people like Jimmy Savile were able to get away with sexually abusing children, and he was friends with the European royalty for decades. Jimmy Savile, 1926 to 2011, was an English media personality who was well known in the United Kingdom for his eccentricities, and at the time of his death was generally respected for his charitable work. He was knighted in 1990. In late 2012, almost a year after his death, reports surfaces indicating that Savile had committed sexual abuse against hundreds of individuals throughout his 50-year career. His alleged victims ranging from prepubescent girls and boys to adults. So yeah, not only can it can happen for a long time, and people can get away with it, and it could happen amongst very, very powerful people. Here is an article by the Daily Beast, how Thatcher's government covered up a VIP pedophile ring. As many as 30 high-profile figures from the Church of England, private schools, big business were members of and advocates for the pedophile information exchange. Some of the best reporting on the Epstein investigation has been done by 60 Minutes Australia. Definitely something I recommend. They talk specifically to Virginia Roberts and some of the other whistleblowers. It's also important to have a historical context in what we are dealing with here. There is a documentary, The Conspiracy of Silence, as well as a book titled The Franklin Cover-Up, written by State Senator John DeCamp. He uses a source as well as many others. Ted Gunderson from the FBI. I don't know if he is that reliable. We have a high degree of reliability when it comes to Paul Benassi, who was the primary whistleblower on this pedophile ring that existed in America in around the 1980s in a place that's referred to as Boys Town. We also have Noreen Gosch, the whistleblower and mother of Johnny Gosch, who went missing. I consider her a whistleblower because she gave out a lot of intimate information involving her interactions with the FBI and the police in her town of Des Moines, Iowa, I believe. She wrote a book titled Why Johnny Can't Come Home. Nick Bryant also wrote a book with a large number of documents making the case that there was a pedophile ring that involved high, prominent politicians. As I said, State Senator John DeCamp, you could see on the left here, author of The Franklin Cover-Up, Lawrence King being the primary suspect in this investigation. We also have women like Kathy O'Brien, who claim to have been raped by a large number of politicians. Now, it's important to know that she has quite the incredible story in both her speeches and this book, Transformation America, the true life story of a CIA mind control slave, which, by the way, they absolutely exist. We know from the MKUltra and the Operation Artichoke documents. It's just a matter of who the actual victims are. So we know that they're out there. Maybe she's one of them. Maybe she's a fake, by Kathy O'Brien and Mark Phillips. Now, the very fact that a woman like Christine Blasey Ford gets all this media attention because she makes a claim, and she gets to speak in front of Congress, having millions of people listen to her, while this woman is totally silent, saying I was raped by a number of politicians as part of a CIA operation, well, no one listens to her. So you see a blatant double standard. When it fits the narrative, then these are powerful whistleblowers who we need to listen to, respect, and take their story into consideration and believe them. But, when it's Kathy O'Brien, it doesn't even, you're just called a conspiracy theorist. Again, they've issued you calling people names. So we have in the upper right-hand corner here, Paul Benassi, 1993, has a series of investigations with Ted Gunderson from the FBI. Again, the primary movies to understand this operation is Who Took Johnny, a movie that was on Netflix, Why Johnny Can't Come Home, by Noreen Gosh, and the investigator is former chief FBI agent in charge of Los Angeles, Dallas, and Memphis, Ted L. Gunderson. It is alleged that Craig J. Spence, a Washington lobbyist, was the head of the blackmailing operation for the Franklin scandal. Again, like I mentioned, primary sources can be found in A Story of Power Brokers, Child Abuse, and Betrayal by Nick Bryant. Two other very similar stories to the Franklin scandal. One is called the Kincora Boys Home, which was a boys' home in Belfast, Northern Ireland, that was the scene of a serious organized child sexual abuse, causing a scandal and attempted cover-up in 1980 with allegations of state collusion. The Northern Ireland Historical Institutional Abuse Inquiry, HIA, began examining allegations relating to the home on May 31st, 2016, including the claims that there was a pedophile ring at the home with links to the intelligence services. Northern Ireland Security Teresa Villers said that all state agencies would cooperate with the inquiry. On January 20th, 2017, the HIA inquiry concluded that the abuse which took place at Kincora Boys' Home was limited to the actions of 3 staff members and did not take place with the collusion of state intelligence services. So, that is another very similar situation that there's a lot of debate around. Another one is called North Fox Island. The story of Francis D. Sheldon at North Fox Island has been tied to a series of unsolved child murders that occurred in the Detroit suburbs more than 4 decades ago. The good introduction to this research is a Business Insider article titled, Jeffrey Epstein was accused of sex trafficking young girls on his mysterious private island. Over 40 years ago, a different millionaire escaped justice in a stunningly similar matter. Here's just a few highlights of the investigative research. In 1960, the millionaire outbid the state government for the island, shaped like an upside-down teardrop that hovers 19 miles off the coast of Michigan's Leelanau Peninsula. The state offered the owner, an elderly woman, about $3,500. The Detroit Free Press reported Sheldon gave her $20,000. Both center, meaning both the Epstein case and the Fox Island case, both center on allegations that secretive millionaires weaponized their philanthropic giving cliques of connected friends and private island paradises to prey on young victims and escape justice. Like Sheldon, Epstein was a millionaire, a philanthropist, and a man with powerful friends, and neither stood trial for the crimes for which they were accused. In a discussion about Sheldon, one investigator says, he comes across as a sort of eccentric, a nature lover. A true crime podcaster told Business Insider her series, Don't Talk to Strangers, is a deep dive into Michigan's unsolved Oakland County child killings, which took place between 1976 and 1977 in the suburbs of the northwest of Detroit. 4 children were snatched off the street and held up to 19 days before being murdered, police say. The researcher goes on to say, General Richards, a Catholic school gym teacher and aspiring politician who moonlighted as a magician, was tasked with luring children, including some of his own students, to the camp. Richards pleaded guilty to charges of first-degree criminal sexual assault, and he testified about his role in Michigan's pedophile community at a congressional hearing on child abuse. But before his arrest on July 23, 1976, police records say that the former gym teacher managed to call and warn his friend Sheldon, who promptly disappeared. Sheldon and Richards weren't the only 2 men involved in the alleged conspiracy either. Dyer Grossman, a wealthy science teacher who taught at the Harvey School near Katona, New York, and Adam Starchild, the alias of a convicted fraudster, offshore accounts expert, and former Boy Scouts assistant scoutmaster Malcolm McConey, were also accused of helping Sheldon set up a number of shell companies, including the phony Church of the New Revelation and the Oceanic Educational Group Ocean Living Institute, according to a 1976 Michigan State Police report. So, according to Appleman, who was one of the researchers into this case, the North Fox Island operation functioned essentially as a subscription service centered on the production of child pornography and the sexual abuse of boys ages 7 to 16. Wikipedia gives a brief introduction to this incident, summarizing it as, in the 1960s and 1970s, a child pornography ring was discovered operating on North Fox Island. The proprietor of the island, Francis Sheldon, used his position in a large social program called Brother Paul's Children's Mission, as well as his position as a big brother with the YMCA in Ann Arbor, to fly boys to his private island retreat. And the Ann Arbor News published a story in their weekend magazine on the proprietor's life, then published a second story when the crimes were uncovered. The crimes have long been suspected to have ties to the Oakland County child killer case. We also have Paul Benassi giving specific accusations about something that happened inside the Bohemian Grove. This is a gathering in northern San Francisco where but very wealthy individuals, the Bush families, have been there. Nixon was there, Reagan was there, CIA intelligence officers were there. You have Tony Blair getting invited. You have Colin Powell attending and singing along. They basically go into this place, and at night they sing a song to an owl called the Cremation of Care during this sort of ritualistic ceremony. It was all caught on camera. This is originally what got Alex Jones's name very big. So we have more allegations of elites and people in powerful positions engaging in such heinous crimes. Peter Dalgish, born May 20th, 1957, is the Canadian founder of the Street Kids International Charity and a convicted sex offender. Until 2015, he was the county representative for the United Nations Habitat in Afghanistan. He is currently in prison in Nepal for 9 years, being convicted of sexually assaulting 2 young boys. He denies this charge. So again, we have more allegations that Jeffrey Epstein had leverage on people going back to his days in Bear Stearns, which is how he originally escaped justice the first time. Here is one document we have from the FBI vault. I have this dated May 24th, 2018 FBI release document. And it actually says, Epstein has also provided information to the FBI as agreed upon. So it was never really made public that there was at least some deal, that maybe they would have said, well, we let him off early. We let this one guy off early because we got so much information on these other people, and that's how we're seeking justice. This was never communicated. So this is possibly a document indicating that there was some Epstein intelligence connections. The potential ties of Jeffrey Epstein to intelligence agencies continues. We have Alexander Acosta. In 2007 to 2008, a U.S. attorney, Acosta, approved a plea deal that allowed human trafficking ringleader Jeffrey Epstein to plead guilty to a single state charge of solicitation. If you watch, or if you read Filthy Rich by James Patterson, you'll see that in the Palm Beach area alone, there were 46 accusers. So the fact that he got off with only one of these in exchange for a federal non-prosecution agreement. Here we have Vicky Ward reporting for the Daily Beast. Epstein's name, I was told, had been raised by the Trump administration team when Alexander Acosta, the former U.S. attorney in Miami who'd infamously cut Epstein a non-prosecution plea deal back in 2007, was being interviewed for the job of labor secretary. The plea deal put a hard stop to a separate federal investigation of alleged sex crimes with minors and trafficking. Again, remember, the first initial reports were Ann and Marie Farmer going back to 1996 when they went directly to the FBI. Is the Epstein case going to cause a problem for confirmation hearings? Acosta had been asked. Acosta had explained breezily, apparently, that back in the day he'd had just one meeting on the Epstein case. He'd cut a prosecution deal with one of Epstein's attorneys because he had been told to back off, that Epstein was above his pay grade. I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone, he told his interviewers in the Trump transition, who evidently thought that was a sufficient answer and went ahead and hired Acosta. We also have a very interesting hot mic moment with a news anchor at ABC, Amy Robach. So again, we can see this is an example of how these things can stay undercover for so long. Also, Amy Robach did a very in-depth investigation and was eventually told to back off. We'll see. This is reporting from Project Veritas, a transcript of the hot mic moment seen below. I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Epstein victim Virginia Roberts. And then Alan Dershowitz was also implicated in because of the planes she, Virginia Roberts, told me everything. We convinced her to talk to us. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton, we had everything. So, do I think he was killed? Referring to Jeffrey Epstein. 100% yes, I do, because, do you want it? He made his whole living blackmailing people. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that that also squashed the story. Here we have a brief Wikipedia summary. We also have the 3 of the many articles mentioned where investigators came to the conclusion that this was a blackmailing operation. Video recordings. Epstein installed concealed cameras in numerous places on his properties to allegedly record sexual activity with underage girls by prominent people for criminal purposes such as blackmail. Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's close companion, told a friend that Epstein's private island in the Virgin Islands was completely wired for video, and the friend believed that Maxwell and Epstein were videotaping everyone on the island as an insurance policy. When the police raided his Palm Beach residence in 2006, 2 hidden pinhole cameras were discovered in his home. It was also reported that Epstein's mansion in New York was wired extensively with a video surveillance system. Maria Farmer, an artist who worked for Epstein in 1996, noted that Epstein showed her a media room in the New York mansion where there were individuals monitoring the pinhole cameras throughout the house. The media room was accessed through a hidden door. She stated that in the media room, there were men sitting there, and I looked on all the cameras, and I saw toilet, bed, toilet, bed. She said it was very obvious that they were monitoring private moments. Epstein allegedly lent girls to powerful people to ingratiate himself with them and also to gain possible blackmail information. According to the Department of Justice, he kept compact discs locked in his safe in the New York mansion with handwritten labels that included the description, young name plus name. Epstein partially confirmed that he had blackmail material when he told the New York Times reporter in 2018 off the record that he had dirt on powerful people, including information about their sexual proclivities and recreational drug use. So, as I mentioned earlier, here is where Eric Weinstein is mentioning about the small camera he saw in Jeffrey Epstein's art. Here we have evidence that Virginia Roberts is not just someone claiming to, have known him. We have a picture with Virginia Roberts and Prince Andrew with Ghislaine Maxwell in the background. In the upper right-hand corner, we have a image of Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan residence. In the bottom right-hand corner, we have Anne and Marie Farmer at about the age where they were assaulted by Maxwell and Epstein. Again, it's very important to know that this guy had so many close connections. You can read in this Intelligencer article, Jeffrey Epstein's Rolodex, a guide to his famous friends and acquaintances to see how deep the connections really do go. So, knowing all of this about how elite pedophile rings have operated in the past, it stands to reason that it at least can raise suspicion. Raising suspicion and researching into something does not mean you 100% believe every aspect of everything. In the same way, a police officer or a private investigator can investigate a crime. That doesn't make him a psycho conspiracy theorist. If there's evidence and you look into it, it may lead somewhere, maybe it doesn't. Certainly, we have every reason to believe the following emails are very indicative of something that is clearly using codes to describe something else that is really going on, and some are just blatantly damning. For example, we have Tony Podesta sending an email to John Podesta, the head of Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016. Are you in NYC Thursday, July 9th? Marina wants you to come to dinner. Mary, indicating maybe his wife or another woman will join them. So here is Marina Abramovic sending an email to Tony Podesta, John's brother. The subject of the email is dinner. Dear Tony, I'm so looking forward to the spirit cooking dinner at my place. Do you think you will be able to let me know if your brother is joining? All my love, Marina Abramovic, LLC. Now, we actually have footage of Marina Abramovic engaging in spirit cooking. This is a 1997 film where you can see her painting on the walls. And then after she walks away, you can see mix fresh breast milk with fresh sperm milk, drink on earthquake 2 nights. I mean, extremely bizarre behavior when you have someone, emailing the Podestas about this spirit cooking ritualistic behavior. I mean, every time, the cops, I remember, saw me, they said, well, why were you parked in that lot for so long? That raises suspicion. Well, certainly this obviously raises suspicion. This, if anything, would justify an investigation. And then look at this. With a sharp knife, cut deeply into the middle finger of your left hand, eat the pain. So, cutting the middle finger of your left hand and eating the pain. We actually have, if you zoom in right here on Podesta's left hand, it appears he has a Band-Aid in his left middle finger. And we also have that email. This is what the elites are involved in. We also have Lady Gaga and Marina Abramovic looking at this disgusting image we have here of a woman. I don't know if that's a real human or just a, real-life looking mannequin, but this is extremely bizarre behavior. Certainly no one we should be looking up to or admiring. Here we have Marina Abramovic with Jacob Rothschild, 2 extremely powerful, influential people in the world. Taking a picture in front of an image that is extremely bizarre. It almost looks satanic with this red background, fiery, hell-looking sort of scenery. Turns out the name of the painting is Satan Summoning His Legions. We have other WikiLeaks emails between Uma Abedin. We have Hillary Clinton and John Podesta involved in these. And look at what they're talking about in their emails. With fingers crossed, the old rabbit's foot out of the box in the attic. Oh, well, that's, some sort of superstitious thing. The old rabbit's foot in the box in the attic. I will be sacrificing a chicken in the backyard to Moloch. Now, Moloch brings us back to the Bohemian Grove entity in which a large amount of elites get together and do this cremation of care ceremony. We're dealing with people who are involved in some of the most bizarre behavior that when you realize that pedophilia or child abuse or rape and sexual blackmail simply is an extension of this ruling ideology that they all share in common. About 10 years ago, there was a very big scandal of the Clinton Foundation giving money to Haiti and the money not going to Haitian relief efforts such as getting the citizens access to food, water, clothing, safe transportation. This is around the same time we have the New Life Children's Refuge case, which was a legal case about an incident which occurred in the chaotic aftermath of the January 12, 2010 Haiti earthquake. On January 29, 2010, a group of 10 American Baptist missionaries from Idaho attempted to cross the Haiti-Dominican Republic border with 33 Haitian children, most of whom were not orphans and had families. The group, known as New Life Children's Refuge, did not have proper authorization for transporting the children and were arrested on kidnapping charges. The missionaries denied any wrongdoing and claimed they were rescuing orphans and leading them to a Dominican hotel which was being transformed into an orphanage. 9 of the 10 missionaries were later released, but NLCR founder Laura Silsby remained incarcerated in Haiti. By the time she went to trial May 13th, the charges had been reduced to arranging irregular travel, and the prosecution sought a 6-month prison term. On May 17th, she was found guilty and sentenced to time served in jail prior to the trial. Again, human trafficking is something global. It's not just something that happens in America. We have a number of other reasons to think that Clinton was at least in the know about Laura Silsby. Number of WikiLeaks emails, Uba Abedin constantly forwarding Hillary articles on Laura Silsby's organization. One of the first things she did was seek interest in getting Laura Silsby off the hook. The attorney who represented Laura Silsby was a man himself, a convicted sex trafficker. And look at who these people associate with. Certainly, if the media is ever doing a hit piece on someone who's sane, they'll say, well, haven't you associated with this person and that person? We have Hillary Clinton associating with Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein, both big donors to the Clinton Foundation. They were close friends, Harvey and Epstein. Here is another WikiLeak from Tony Podesta. Dear Mac, can't believe it's almost 50 years since Camp Nose. I have stayed in touch with Denny Hastert and Jan Attelt and Andy Dolan all these years. Now, Dennis Hastert was the former Speaker of the House. Here he is, third in line to be President of America, an extremely powerful position. And what is interesting about Denny Hastert? Well, Dennis Hastert, ex-House Speaker, who admitted sexual abuse, leaves prison. The plea deal does not explicitly say that Mr. Hastert sexually abused individual A, but at his sentencing last year, the former House Speaker admitted for the first time that he sexually abused the teenage wrestlers he coached at Yorkville High School in Yorkville, Illinois, where he worked from 1965 to 1981. So from this, we can clearly see, look, secrets can be kept for a long time, even if it's someone extremely powerful. So the idea that, that would have gotten out by now. Speaker of the House, come on, we would know about it. He could never get in that position. Nope, we have actual examples of this happening. Also, imagine the amount of leverage you would have on someone if you had that information on them. So it can go both ways. It's someone in power that you get blackmail on, or someone who you have blackmail on, who you tell, I own you from here on out, do A, B, and C. We're going to promote you to this or that level of power and influence, and we just pretty much own this individual with that amount of leverage. Federal prosecutors have said that individual A is one of at least 4 boys as young as 14 molested by Mr. Hastert decades ago. So we had 4 boys. It wasn't just, one person probably didn't speak out, or if there were really 4, one of them would have come forward, or the Democrats would have, exposed their opposition. Not the case at all. This is a very clear example. I want to apologize to the boys I mistreated when I was their coach, Mr. Hastert said at his sentencing in 2016. What I did was wrong, and I regret it. And look, here is another WikiLeaks email that is something extremely suspicious. And again, if you are in at least cahoots, or if you're in the same car as someone doing something illegal and it's your car, you get in trouble. So the idea that we shouldn't be holding these people accountable for who they choose to associate with is, of course, ridiculous. With enormous gratitude to advance man extraordinaire Aber, I'm popping up again to share our excitement about the reprise of our gang's visit to the farm in Lovettsville. And I thought I'd share a couple more notes. We plan to heat the pool, so a swim is a possibility. Bonnie will be Uber service to transport Ruby Emerson and Maeve Luzzatto, 11, 9, and almost 7, mentioning the ages of the children. So you'll have some further entertainment, and they will be in the pool for sure. I mean, certainly, that is clearly indicating unjustified behavior, or at least potentially seeking out mistreatment of minors. Now, we have a actual example of this as far as the Central Intelligence Agency is concerned with Operation Midnight Climax. This was an operation initially established in 1954 by Sidney Gottlieb and placed under direction of the Federal Narcotics Bureau in Boston, Massachusetts, with Officer George Hunter White under the pseudonym of Morgan Hall for the Central Intelligence Agency as a sub-project of MKUltra, a CIA mind control research program that began in the 1950s. Programs were shut down. Hundreds of scientists worked on them. Brief history. The project that started in 1954 consisted of a web of CIA-run safe houses in San Francisco, Marin County, California, and New York City. It was established in order to study the effects of LSD on unconsenting individuals. Prostitutes on the CIA payroll were instructed to lure clients back to safe houses where they were surreptitiously pilled with a wide range of substances. Including LSD, and monitored behind one-way glass. Every one of the acts was blatantly illegal, and several significant operational techniques were developed in this theater, including extensive research into sexual blackmail, surveillance technology, and the possible use of mind-altering drugs in field operations. The Operation Midnight Climax program was soon expanded, and CIA operatives began dosing people in restaurants, bars, and beaches. The safe houses were dramatically scaled back in 1963 following a report by the CIA Inspector General John Ehrman, which strongly recommended closing the facility. So this lasted roughly a decade, and then it was only scaled back. So this, again, proof that these things can go on a long time without everyone knowing about it. And why don't they know about it? Well, that gets into other operations, such as Operation Mockingbird, where the CIA had 400 journalists on the payroll, or they get someone, to call Amy Robach and threaten to withhold other important information from the organization. This is how things are kept in secret. So the idea that Epstein couldn't have done all these bad things, or, well, I guess he could have, but he couldn't have been in cahoots with extremely powerful, influential people we see as legitimate. No, that's also provably not the case. In 1974, the journalist Seymour Hersh exposed the CIA's illegal spying on U.S. citizens and how the CIA had conducted non-consensual drug experiments. His reports started the lengthy process of bringing long-suppressed details about MKUltra to light. Project MKUltra came to light in the spring of 1977 during a wide-ranging survey of the CIA's Technical Services Division. John K. Vance, a member of the CIA Inspector General staff, discovered that the agency was running a research project that included administering LSD and other drugs to unwilling human subjects. Now, one of the biggest connections in Epstein's contact list was Ehud Barak, former Prime Minister of Israel, as well as, Bill Clinton flying on his plane 26 times. Also, Prince Andrew, of course, he was associated with Donald Trump very loosely, and as we saw previously, has virtually all the contacts we can imagine with Les Wexner. It's generally recognized that Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, was a spy for the Mossad, also working loosely with possibly MI5 as a media mogul. I definitely recommend you look further into this, and thank you for watching. Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone.